Good morning. It's a pleasure to be with you, albeit from a distance, and to be with this very distinguished gathering of talent. I'm very grateful to President Roland Chin, to Vice President Albert Chow, and to Dr. Eva Wong for extending the invitation to join your conference. And I only regret that I can't be with you in person, although I understand that we will have a live Q&A afterward. The themes of the NUI conference at Hong Kong Baptist University all focus on teaching and learning and how our institutions can improve both. And heaven knows there's a lot of room for improvement. In my own experience, I went to an excellent liberal arts college, Dartmouth College, in New Hampshire in the United States, and I received, on the whole, excellent education in the liberal arts and sciences, but I still recall classes that were hardly state-of-the-art. For example, I had a 6-person class on European diplomatic history at some point as a history major, and the professor made sure that in the course of an entire semester there would not be one question asked in that small lecture class. And he lectured to us by reading weathered, yellowed 3x5 cards, and he read them, he was an elderly gentleman, with a magnifying glass. Things have definitely gotten better in most of our institutions since then, and many of us have changed the way we teach. In my own case, I have moved from a long-standing focus on giving lectures, the great lecture format of teaching, something that I hope I became reasonably good at in time, also to experimenting in online education. My colleague Peter Bull and I have created a large MOOC, China X, 5000多年的中国历史, more than 5,000 years of Chinese history. And now, since I've been teaching at the Harvard Business School, I have been teaching almost exclusively in the case method of teaching, and not just for MBAs, but also for my undergraduates. And I've seen how that method helps to transform undergraduate education. My Harvard undergraduates now have to do 3 things that Harvard students are not used to doing. They actually have to come to class. They have to do the reading because 50% of their grade is based on their discussion of the reading in class. And third point, no laptops, no electronics, utterly unplugged. And it has made a difference, and they're the best undergraduate classes I've ever had the privilege of teaching. Now, all of this is important, but at the end of the day, it is what we teach, not just how we teach, that is most important. And I have had personally the great privilege of teaching what and how I want. And that's possible because we perhaps take too easily for granted in many parts of the world the institutional and intellectual settings in which we teach. I was reminded of this earlier this month as I thought about the 100th anniversary of May 4th, 1919. May 4th, we all know, was many things. It was a demonstration by just a few thousand students in Beijing that shook and changed the Chinese political landscape. It gave its name to an era, which we normally think of as from about 1915 to 1925, the May 4th era, one of extraordinary creativity and experimentation, an intellectual and cultural revolution that was much more profound and much more enduring than the so-called cultural revolution of Mao Zedong. And the events of a century ago still speak to us in basic and important ways in our world of higher education, for this past is closely linked to our present. This morning, I'd like to focus on but one element of May 4th, the world of Chinese universities from which patriotic students bravely challenged the Beiyang government on May 4th, 1919, and afterward. This is part, and I'm interested in this and in this topic broadly speaking, because it is part of my research and ongoing research on the past and present of research universities and their likely future. A study of the world of universities in the 21st century that looks to leaders of the 19th century, German universities, of the 20th century, American universities in large measure, and prospectively to the 21st century, where aspirationally Chinese universities aim to be at the lead. Back in 1919, China may have been divided politically in that era, but it was building institutions that would be the foundations of today's great universities, which are again seeking to be world-class. 13 of them from all over Beijing sent students to Tiananmen to protest China's humiliation at Versailles. Those students came not just from settings like this old examination hall for the old imperial examinations last used in 1905, but from modern settings like this. Here you can see, even though it's a contemporary photograph, the Tsinghua University campus as it would have looked already in 1918. Or you can see here the famous red building of Peking University when it was located downtown, not far from the Imperial Palace, in a street that is now renamed Wusadaje, or May 4th Boulevard. How had the students who went to Tiananmen from the Red Building and elsewhere in Beijing, how had they been educated? Let us pause and think of the Peking University of those days. Its president was Tsai Yuen-pei. Tsai was a Hanlin scholar by the mid-1890s. He was deeply learned in the Chinese classics. He went on to receive a doctorate in Leipzig in the first decade of the 20th century, and in Germany he became a deep admirer of the ideas of Wilhelm von Humboldt. Humboldt, as I'm sure many of you know, was instrumental in founding the mother of all modern research universities, the University of Berlin, at a time of Prussia's national crisis in 1810. His vision, which has animated so many institutions since, was based on three simple principles. One, the concept of a university devoted to scientific research at the highest level. Second, a commitment to foster an education in the liberal arts and sciences that stressed Bildung, or the education of the whole person, as distinct from Übung, a more practical training. And for this purpose, the philosophical faculty, what we would today call arts and sciences, was to be at the heart of the university. And a third and defining aspiration was in the realm of governance. A university needed the autonomy to make its own appointments and to set its own priorities, insulated to a high degree from political winds. And perhaps in the making of great universities over the last several centuries, no criterion has been more important than that of governance. Well, in China's time of national crisis, in the first decade of the new republic, Tsai Yuen-pei followed Humboldtian ideas. In his first month as the Republic of China's first Minister of Education in 1912, Tsai issued an official opinion that universities should no longer simply serve government, but should be granted institutional autonomy. They should, he said, be places for an education with a world view, 世界观教育. And he stressed the importance, as Humboldt had, of Bildung, of broad humanistic learning as the foundation of both teaching and scientific research. He is an icon of the university today, and here he is, preserved in bronze. When Tsai Yuen-pei assumed the presidency of Peking University in 1917, his inaugural address declared, quote, "People outside our university observe that all who study here have it in their mind simply to become officials and to get rich. Students," he said, "should do something different. They should devote themselves to learning, not to narrow specializations, and devote themselves to learning above all in the humanities and the natural sciences." And his presidency saw the rapid growth of the humanities at Beida, as the university was popularly called, and he even had the courage to phase out the business and engineering divisions. Above all, Tsai Yuen-pei stressed what Humboldt had called Lehrfreiheit and Lernfreiheit, the freedom to teach and the freedom to learn. He said this as Beida president: "The modern principle of freedom of thought has already been publicly accepted, but the ability to make this happen rests solely with the university. The expression of thought by university teachers is not only free of restriction by religion or political parties, but also free of constraints imposed by renowned scholars. If one has a view and expounds upon it in a reasonable manner, then even within the same school, opposing theories can be allowed to coexist, providing students with the opportunity to compare and choose. This is what makes a true institution of higher learning. We must," he said, "follow the general rule of freedom of thought and freedom of expression, and not allow any one branch of philosophy or any one tenet of religion to confine our minds." He recruited to this national university the philosopher Hu Shi, a student of John Dewey at Columbia, Hu Shi had written, "For a country to lack a navy or an army is not a cause for shame, but a country without a university, a national library, museum, or art gallery should be ashamed." Hu Shi became perhaps the leading example of modern Chinese liberalism. But Tsai Yuen-pei also recruited to the Beida campus the scholars Li Dajiao and Chen Duxiu, who would be instrumental in the introduction of Marxism to China. And as Chen Duxiu, who was Dean of Liberal Arts at Beida, as dean, he linked the freedoms enjoyed inside the university to those outside it. He wrote, "Human society will go forward in the general trend of highlighting human rights and democracy, even though there may be occasional twists and turns, or even a reversal along this journey. Only those who are too short-sighted will deny this general trend." While Tsai Yuen-pei's governing principles were followed across most Chinese universities in that era, as Chinese universities rose then, as now, in global stature. By the late 1920s and early 1930s, just across the street from just across the street from Yanjing University, where Beida would later move, National Tsinghua University had emerged as one of China's leading comprehensive universities, home to great scholars such as Jiang Tingfu, one of the greatest historians of the first half of the 20th century in China, and his student, who would later be my teacher, John Fairbank, who learned his Chinese history from Jiang Tingfu in Beijing in the early 1930s. Tsinghua became home to four of the most famous scholars in the land: Liang Qichao, Wang Guowei, Chen Yingke, and Zhao Yuanren, all of them products of both classical and international learning, all at home in Chinese culture, yet cutting-edge scholars in the modern humanities and social sciences, and all famous abroad as well as home. Like Tsai Yuen-pei on the Beida campus, these four scholars, as they were collectively known, are preserved in bronze on the Tsinghua campus in commemoration of their accomplishments and their independence. After Wang Guowei committed suicide as the nationalist armies approached Beijing, drowning rather than joining the nationalist revolutionary fervor, his colleague Chen Yingke wrote on his memorial stele, "His was a spirit independent and a mind unfettered. 独立之精神，自由之思想." Academic freedom was promoted and defended at Tsinghua by its long-standing president from 1931 through 1948 and then later on Taiwan, Mei Qi, a staunch proponent of liberal education, institutional autonomy, and academic freedom. He promoted the liberal arts as central not only to individual growth, but also to national salvation. He was the leading figure behind the establishment and running during the Second World War of National Southwest Associated University, 国立西南联合大学, popularly known as Lianda. And over 9 years, from 1937 to 1946, during and after the Sino-Japanese War, this institution brought together an extraordinary collection of faculty, students, and administrators to China's southwest to resist, to endure, and to outlast the Japanese invasion. Lianda's course of study for its 3,000 undergraduates was modeled on that of Tsinghua and on some American colleges. As Mei Qi insisted, especially during a time of national crisis, quote, liberal education is primary, specialization secondary. No wonder Mei Qi is widely regarded by Tsinghua alumni still today as Tsinghua's eternal president, 清华大学永远的校长. Well, what does any of this have to do with us today, with the legacy of May 4th for the present? Well, in my view, this history is very much alive. Recently, at the annual anniversary ceremony at Tsinghua University found it necessary to wall off the Wang Guowei Memorial because too many people wanted to pay tribute to it and to the ideals inscribed on it. And today doing so in particular in defense of two outspoken scholars, Professors Guo Yuhua and Xu Zhangrun, here seeking to pay their respects at the Wang Guowei Memorial Stele, even as they are under enormous political pressure and investigation for their critique of today's Beijing government. And on the wall surrounding the monument, this temporary wall, walling it off, reads today a sardonic poster reframing Chen Yingke's famous words, quote, Tsinghua at 108 years, a self-made barrier against any independent spirit, so thick that no mind remains unfettered. I am personally not so pessimistic as that about Tsinghua because I know their faculty so well and their students so well. But we do have to recognize that we are in a world in which the ideals of the students of 1919 have no place in the official politics of today's Beijing. Nor would I be pessimistic about Beida. After all, it was in the tradition of an intellectually vibrant and diverse Peking University that its students would play dramatic roles in challenging a series of Chinese governments in the liberal and patriotic demonstrations, not just of 1919, but also of 1935, and most famously, perhaps, of 1989. And today, a century after he assumed the presidency of Beida, an elite liberal arts college named for Tsai Yuen-pei sits at the heart of Peking University. And in Yuen-pei College, a select group of Peking University students can choose and change their course of study in the liberal arts and sciences in an intimate intellectual setting. At the same time, however, as you can see in this slide of one of Beida's gates, Beida is also under a form of house arrest. Cars cannot go in and out of its campus without pre-notification. In principle, the same is true of people. Several of its recent and excellent presidents have been unceremoniously ousted by the Communist Party for perceived failings to promote discipline among Beida students. This is something that never happened under the Beiyang or nationalist governments. Yet Beida still has idealistic scholars and students, even Marxist students, such as some pictured here. Under the political leadership of President Xi Jinping, all Chinese students have been encouraged to study Marxism. But some have actually gone beyond the official distilled canon of 所谓的马克思主义 of Marxism to actually read the original Marx and been inspired by it to do action in society. Chen Duxiu and Li Dajiao would be very proud of these Beida students, even if the government has punished them. And Beida is still, of course, open to the world. Here we see Harvard's President Larry Bacow at Peking University just this March quoting Tsai Ing-wen on the importance of freedom to teach and freedom to learn in a ceremony very graciously hosted by Beida's excellent president, President Hao Ping. The fact is that no one in the world of universities, from Humboldt to the present, has ever said it better than Tsai Ing-wen. As Tsai Ing-wen said, and I quote, "Universities are places for grand learning. They are grand because they follow the general principle of free thought." And when this spirit turns back from bronze into the flesh, we will know that Beida and Chinese universities as a group are positioned at last to realize the promise and spirit and energy of those young students of May 4th, 1919, who, in their own way, had spirits independent and minds unfettered. Let me just close by saying that this history is but one reason why I am pleased to see this conference being hosted in Hong Kong. Because few places in the world have done more in recent decades to promote, define, and defend the liberal arts and sciences as central to modern universities and as central to a modern citizenry. Hong Kong had, after 1949, both the burden and the opportunity to preserve and advance the study of Chinese civilization, led by the establishment of the Chinese University of Hong Kong, a modern, in some and in many ways more enduring, Xinan Lianda. It also promoted world-class scholarship in the international humanities, social sciences, and sciences. And in recent years, every Hong Kong university has renewed its commitment to a liberal and general education, and in very creative ways. And for an education in the liberal arts and sciences here in Hong Kong, perhaps two institutions deserve special mention. One is Lingnan University, founded in 1889 in Guangzhou. It had moved periodically to Macau and to Hong Kong in times of disruption on the mainland, but maintained a focus on the liberal arts. It would be re-established in a formal way in Hong Kong in the 1980s and become a liberal arts university in the 1990s. And the other, of course, is your host these days in Hong Kong. That is Hong Kong Baptist University, founded in 1956 with the mission of providing whole-person education in a manner that Humboldt would have understood. Hong Kong Baptist University would grow over time in physical and intellectual strength under its longtime president, Dr. Daniel Tzu Chi-wei. And it has built a strong physical plant, as you can see. And it has extended its mission back to the Chinese mainland with its United International College in collaboration with Beijing Normal University in Zhuhai. As President Roland Chin has recently put it, we at Hong Kong Baptist University aim to become a leading research-led liberal arts university in Asia and in the world. And this is one reason why we at Harvard are so pleased to be partners with Hong Kong Baptist University in the establishment of Harvard's first summer school in Greater China this coming summer. President Chin reminded students with an adapted quote from a Star Wars film of the empowering force of a liberal arts education, even or especially in uncertain times. In this regard, Hong Kong Baptist University and the other great institutions in Hong Kong are in a strong intellectual and educational lineage with their predecessors long ago in 1919 and far away in Beijing, for they have remained true to a mission for an education that is unfettered in spirit and independent in mind. The creative, questioning, and independent spirit of May 4th is with them and with us all still. May that long be true, and my friends, may the 4th be with you. Thank you very much.
There we go.
All right. Thank you. Okay. All right. Good to see you.
There, finally. So sorry. So sorry.
No, not at all. Okay, so we start a conversation. Okay. First question from Glenn, Dr. Glenn Chai from the Hong Kong American Center.
Hello.
Wonderful.
It's wonderful to see you in this context. Is this okay? All right.
Yeah, that's great.
As you know, I've been here for a long time working on the Fulbright program, and we were active in the 4-year transition. And I wondered if you could share with us, I think many people in the room are not from Hong Kong, but they may not know. But you were with the UGC at the time of the decision making to shift from a 3-year to a 4-year undergraduate curriculum, in a sense, to capture this liberal arts idea and move away from just the more instrumental vocationalism at university. Could you reflect on the decisions that were made that you observed were part of to make this step as a whole system, to add a year to undergraduates and to build up the liberal arts along with the research university? Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. What a great question. When you think about it in retrospect, it was a much bolder move than we imagined at the time. When you change a system so fundamentally from a 3 to a 4-year system, you do several things. Of course, you change the expectations of students, of parents, but also you change all of the challenges before a university. And on the one hand, every university should be happy to have 1 more year of instruction as long as there is 1 more year of funding. But that is one thing that UGC insisted that we would provide, so that there would be full funding for this additional year. Second, the idea was, and the hope was, that each of the 8 public universities in Hong Kong that are supported by UGC would experiment with what it means to have a liberal arts education. And in that regard, we're extremely pleased with the outcome, because each institution did it differently, thinking of how they could integrate a new and extra year into their curriculum. A third and interesting point is that if you give faculty the idea that they have a whole extra year of deciding what does it mean people to be educated in this day and age and in this time and place, they will debate on it for many years and maybe never come to a conclusion. But in fact, each Hong Kong university managed, and HKBU in particular managed extremely well to come up with a consensus as to how they would do this. And so my hat's off to Hong Kong for doing this, because creating a curriculum, I have done this for several new universities. For example, this new Kunshan Duke University, Duke Kunshan. It's wonderful to create a new curriculum when you don't have any faculty or students already. It's easy, in fact. But in Hong Kong, you had to do it in the most difficult of circumstances, and the results have been really stupendous and very important for all of Asia.
Can I just ask here?
Yeah, sure. And please introduce yourself, okay? Briefly.
Okay, Professor Kirby, I am Emma Zhang, and I work here in Bachelor's University. I was trained in
Yes, Emma.
University as an undergraduate, so I'm a believer of liberal arts education as well. I'm especially inspired by the scholars of May 4th that you mentioned in your speech. And I would say, as a scholar of contemporary academia, I envy those that were active 100 years ago, because they met a period of institutions being first established and built, and the freedom they were facing were unprecedented. But today we're dealing with a university institution that has been captured by maybe nearly 100 years of bureaucracy, and our institution, right, has is subjected to the capture of power by the elites. I would say in China, the political elite had always played a major role in determining what is taught and learned in Chinese universities. And perhaps outside of China is the people with money, people who can cash out the grants and fundings to determine what we do. And today, with this ranking system that we have to work with, we need to work towards, I guess, the measures set up by scholars before us. So in this environment where the institution is reaching, perhaps we can say, a stage of decay, where the power is captured by the elites, the freedom for individual scholars to explore their interests is narrowing. And like you hinted, this training towards vocation rather than scholarship has also captured institutions worldwide. So where do we create the space for freedom that we once had 100 years ago? That's my question.
That is a great question. Thank you very much. I would say that I am not so pessimistic about where things are today. 100 years ago, these people and these institutions were very small. They were extraordinary people, and they had a huge impact, but they taught a very tiny number of students. Today's universities in Hong Kong and in mainland China teach an extraordinary number of students, and they make a bigger difference for many more people than those wonderful professors that I talked about did in May 4th, their own students. Now, those days, the intellectuals had an outsized impact on the public debate of the country, in part because the political leadership was divided, and in part because they had still the very traditional idea that intellectuals had the responsibility to guide the country toward its future. That idea still remains, I should tell you. And you can see it today at Beida and Tsinghua in some of the stories that I discussed. And you can see it in Hong Kong as well, where intellectuals have the freedom to speak, the freedom to teach, the students have the freedom to learn in a way that people in Beijing in 1919 would recognize and would be very proud of. So I am not in the least pessimistic about where we are today. It is true that as universities have gotten bigger, so the Beida or Tsinghua of 1919 did have a much smaller degree of professional bureaucracy. And many people complain that all universities, Harvard among them, but every one of us has a kind of a growing guanliao zhui, a kind of a growing bureaucratism to our systems. But when this is done best, a professional bureaucracy in the service of teaching and learning, this is actually very important and empowering things. And for the size of our universities today, it's almost inevitable. So I'm actually much, the final thing I would say, the tiny number of people who went to universities in 1919 in China would have an outsized influence. But they, in a place like Hong Kong, where institutions like HKBU are educating first-generation college students from all over Hong Kong, Asia, and mainland China, their influence in time will be significant and very, very important. Maybe not always at the top political level, but throughout society. So I don't. People always say that the older days were better, and there was a golden age. In my view, there's never a golden age in higher education except the age that we are in.
We have a number of hands, but Bill, we do have a number of students here in the auditorium. May I first ask if any student has a question? For those who have raised hands, your hand is a student. Always take personal. Any question? Comment? You want to say something? Okay. This is
Hello, it's KIRBY. I'm Joe.
Hi,
Hello. Can you hear me clearly?
I can hear you well. Thank you.
Okay, I'm Joe, and I'm studying.
the audience needs to hear you.
Okay, I'm studying humanities, so a stream from liberal arts. And the moment I told my mom that I was going to study humanities, my mom asked me this question that most moms would ask: what are you going to do with it in the future? What job are you going to do with humanities? So it's a thing, like in the old days, the scholars have made thought they're facing a bigger problem than we are facing right now, like national crisis. But nowadays we're facing problems, I think they are even larger than in the old days, like with the spread of globalization, and we're losing our identity, like the younger generation like myself. Sometimes I'm confused about who I really am. Like I received modern education from like most thoughts from the West, but at home I received traditional education from my family, from parents, my grandparents. So there's a clash between the two things. So how would you comment on that? And I think most of the time, like nowadays, from my personal experience, most education is like money driven. People want to get higher grades in order to get to a better education for a better job. Like for students like me, I've chosen to study humanities, which would possibly not get me that very good paid, well-paid job in the future if I don't try very hard. So how would you comment on that, Professor KIRBY?
Okay. Another excellent question. Well, first I would say that the challenges facing the people of 1919 were actually rather significant. What is the future of Chinese civilization? What is the future of the Chinese race in a world of competitive nations? They determined that they would, and actually quite dramatically in many of them, would go to new directions and look at various both Chinese and international models for what the future of China ought to be. And I think that this, in the best moments of modern Chinese history, this is what the wisest people have done. Not to try to have one answer to all questions, but many answers and a multitudinous set of answers to many questions. And to look around the world for the best and ideal possible solutions. And this is actually why a liberal arts education is the foundation. It's not the only part of education. For Tsai Yuen-pei back then, or for HKBU today, it's a foundation, not the end of education, but an education that does not teach people how to question who they are, where they have come from, what their society is, what world they are living in, how to understand not just the arts and the humanities, but also the sciences, which has always been part of an education in the liberal arts and sciences. You need a foundation of education. You need to be educated before you can be trained, no matter what line of work you are going to go in. If you're trained only to be an accountant, which is a wonderful and important profession, a very important one, because we all have to account for ourselves somehow. You still, if that is the one and only job you will do in your whole life, that may be sufficient. But today, almost everybody has a multitudinous of jobs, a large number of different jobs, and they need to be problem solvers. They need to be reflective on what they know and what they don't know. They need a sense of where human history has been so that they ideally can take it to another dimension. And the most important, at the end of the day, reason for this, I was reading something today by the great German scholar, the founder of Berlin University, whom Tsai Yuen-pei admired, Wilhelm von Humboldt. Humboldt said that it doesn't matter if you are a carpenter or if you are a shopkeeper, whatever you are in life, if you are going to be a good and productive citizen, a basic level of common education is essential for being that productive and good citizen of the modern society. That's even more true from those who graduate from universities. And the last thing I will say is, I've known 3 presidents of Goldman Sachs. 2 of them were history majors, 1 of them an English major. It's quite possible to do very well in the world with the foundation of a liberal arts education.
So I invite a colleague from outside Hong Kong. Okay, maybe.
Okay, thank you.
So usually from Hong Kong, but now
Okay, thank you. Professor Kirby, thank you very much for your very inspiring lecture. I am K.K. Luke, now working in Singapore, and I'm the Chair of Humanities at the University at Nanyang Technological University.
Wonderful, wonderful.
And I would like to share with you and everyone some experience from Singapore, which I think may be relevant to the discussion today. I would like first of all to say that not only was I inspired by your lecture, I also felt that it was very moving. It brings back a lot of memories and feelings about May 4, about all that has happened in 100 years May 4. In the Chinese idiomatic expression, 我感到百感交集啊, 100 feelings all flooding in. Is how I would describe how I feel now. But I feel very inspired by your refusal to feel pessimistic under very difficult circumstances. And I do share some degree of optimism. One reason being that the ideals that Mr. Tsai Yuen-pei and all the brilliant scholars who helped set up the first universities in China, not only have they lived and grew in China, as you said, they have also reached Hong Kong and beyond the borders of China as well, and the ideals have reached Singapore. In fact,
Yes.
quite a long time ago. And the university that I am working now in is actually a modern version, as you know, of the previous Nanyang Daxue, Nanda,
Sure.
which was established in the 1950s with funding not only from the chief sponsor and architect, Mr. Chen Liushi, who of course donated the land and the bulk of the funding, but also from donations from everybody in the community. Rickshaw drivers, hawkers, housewives, students, everybody just chipped in to make it possible to build this great university. For various reasons, we can't go into now, the university did not survive very long as a liberal arts university. And in its modern version now, NTU, Nanyang Technology University, is basically an engineering university.
Yes.
Nevertheless, over the last 10 years or so, we have built up a School of Humanities and Social Sciences, and we're thriving and doing very well. And we're very proud to be able to move the university along with everybody else towards a more comprehensive university and to serve the community better, subscribing to those same ideals that drove the May 4th.
Let's say, that reminds us, and it must remind us, that we are in a wonderful moment today with many of the same ideals inherited from the people of May 4th or other eras of modern East Asian educational development. Think of the challenges of people at the time of May 4th in an era at the height of the so-called warlord period. Think above all of the challenges of the students from Tsinghua and Beida and Nankai University who went and founded Xinan Lianda, Xinan, so Southwest China Collective University, Xinan Lianda, United University, at the height of the Second World War. And they kept the vision what an education ought to be, what its foundation ought to be, but also how an education should serve society and should serve the country. And if they could do it then, how can we not do it in Asia or in America in a time of peace and a time of prosperity? If we can't do that, then the shame is on us. And so it's our job to succeed. The world at the moment looks very tense. You have this Zhongmei, Maoijian, this Chinese-American, trade war. And it's very unfortunate, in my view, and very unpleasant. But it is not anything like the strains of a real war. And let us hope that and pray that it never becomes one. What we need to do is to prepare our students for the challenges of a future that is uncertain, but the present is actually, compared to the time of our predecessors, a very good time, and we need to take advantage of it to the fullest extent.
We probably have time for one more question. Yes, specifically inviting colleagues or students from India. Would you like to make a comment or ask a question? Bill, we do have a number of colleagues and students from India as well. May I?
Hi, Professor Kirby. This is Man Kong Wong from Baptist University.
How do you do?
Hi, I was the director of China Studies here. By mid-80s, we started our collaboration with Tsinghua. And
Yes.
Tsinghua regard EU as the oldest external partner. So we had a close relations with them. At one time, we had a very honest discussion. And the professors there in the field of humanities...
Only once? Only one honest discussion?
Okay, the question is, they think what China now lacks is value education. And we struggle very hard on this.
Yes.
Given your very diverse and rich and profound experience, what would you advise? And how would you see, for example, HKBU or people in the room could become a kind of vehicle to make it possible for them to do a better value education? Thank you very much.
Well, I don't want to preach to Tsinghua or to HKBU because, I think you all know very well how does one appreciate what are the values that have made a civilization or a polity work. Teaching people what has made civilizations great in the past. I think one of the weaknesses of Chinese higher education after 1950 is, of course, the total denigration of everything traditional in China, without coming up with any feasible alternative to it. And this turned out to be a catastrophe under the period of Mao Zedong. And today, people are just growing, but looking very seriously. And you see this at Tsinghua. You see this, for example, you see this at Tsinghua in the most unusual places. The School of Economics and Management, the Jingguanyuan, under Dean Chen Yingyi, they have come up with one of the most extraordinarily impressive, in my view, general education programs in a business school, teaching people critical thinking, teaching them some foundational level of general education and liberal arts education in a business school. And it's remarkable and interesting that this innovation started first at Tsinghua in the School of Economics and Management, single most difficult school probably in the world for students to get into. And there was a visionary dean who did that, but it is also a sense that whatever profession you're in, whether, and in this case, business, management, you need a moral foundation, you need an education.
Hi, Bill. The bandwidth might not be good enough, so may I just invite you to make the concluding comments. The technology tells us that it's time to conclude the session.
Sure. No, I know. Listen, it's been a long session for you all. It's a little bit late here in Boston, so I just want to thank you for your patience and for your excellent questions. And I once again want to reiterate that I only wish that I could be there with you in person.
Thank you so much, Bill. We really appreciate your insights and the inspirations, and the discussion is really good. So may I thank you one more time on behalf of the audience.